Hello there. Previously, we were looking at body systems, and one of the body systems that we finished with was a digestive system. So today, we want to look at another body system called circulatory system. Remember, we said that body systems are made up of different organs that are usually synchronized so that they can perform specific functions. So in the same note, circulatory system will be made up of different components. So what makes up a circulatory system includes blood tissue. It has an organ, very important, the heart, and then other related organs, blood vessels. So we need to find out how each of these components is going to help in circulation. So the first part that you have mentioned is the blood tissue. Blood is a tissue because, remember when we defined a tissue, we said it's a group of cells that perform specific function. So blood consists of several tissues, several cells that is, and also plasma. Some of the cells that makes blood tissue include red blood cells. We have white blood cells. We have platelets. And another major component that carries these cells is blood plasma. And since blood plasma makes the majority of the blood tissue, we shall begin by examining how it is, how blood plasma, or the composition of the blood plasma. Blood plasma. Blood plasma makes about 90%, is made up of 90% water, 90% water, and has dissolved food materials. E.g., you'll find materials, for example, glucose, amino acids, vitamins, fatty acids, and glycerol. We have mineral ions. We have others, we have already said. Water is also part of it. So if you look at what you have mentioned, the food materials that you have mentioned, glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, these materials are coming from digestive system, the smallest, the simplest form of all the materials or food materials that we take in. But again, we want to find out other materials that could be found there. We also have what we call plasma proteins. Plasma proteins. Some of the plasma proteins, for example, include globulins. Globulins, we have albumin, and fibrinogen. Globulins, they form part of the antibodies, and fibrinogen is very important in blood clotting. Roles of plasma, blood plasma. Now, we have said that it's the major component of blood tissue. So because of that, all the cells that we have mentioned previously, red blood cells, platelets, white blood cells, will be contained in blood plasma. Because of that, one role of blood plasma is transportation of these cells. Transportation of red blood cells. I'll use initials. Red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So in the process of transportation of these red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, it will be able to transport, for example, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and so forth. Another role is transportation is a medium for transportation of dissolved food materials. Dissolved food materials. Remember, we have mentioned glucose, amino acids, vitamins, fatty acids, mineral ions, and water. So if plasma contains all these, then it's going to act as a medium for transportation of these food materials to cells that requires them. But as cells and tissues carry out metabolic processes, they'll produce waste metabolic processes. So again, those waste metabolic products will be deposited into blood plasma, and it will be transported to the sites of excretion. So transportation of metabolic wastes to site of excretion. For instance, to kidneys, to the skin, to the lungs, for excretion. Again, another role of blood plasma is distribution of heat around the body. Distribution of heat around the body. We have some organs in the body like the liver. When the body temperatures falls below the expected temperature, the reaction in the liver are going to increase. They become more exothermic, and in the process releases heat. That heat will not remain in the liver, but it will be distributed to the rest of the body through the blood, but majorly in the blood plasma. Another role of blood plasma, we have said it contains mineral ions. We have said it contains those proteins. So because of possession or having mineral ions and these proteins, it is going to enable or be involved in regulation of osmotic pressure. Role number 5 of blood plasma is maintains osmotic pressure of body fluids. Why is it involved? Because it contains solutes that we have mentioned, mineral ions and blood proteins. So those are the major roles of the blood plasma. Another part is red blood cell. Part B, red blood cells. Another name for red blood cells are erythrocytes. They're also called erythrocytes. So the most important thing about red blood cells, we have to find out where they are produced. Red blood cells are produced in bone marrow of short bones. Examples of short bones include the ribs. We have in the vertebral column, we have the vertebrae, and then the sternum. And we also have other organs that produce red blood cells. For instance, the spleen. Now, one major characteristic of red blood cells is that they have a protein. They contain a protein called hemoglobin. So because of this hemoglobin as a pigment, it gives red blood cells red color. So the reason why red blood cells appear red in color is due to a protein pigment called hemoglobin that will make it appear red. Roles of red blood cells include: 1, transportation of oxygen gas. But now this gas cannot be transported in gaseous form. When it comes into contact with red blood cells, oxygen diffuses through the cell membrane of red blood cells and combines with hemoglobin. So oxygen combines with hemoglobin, and then it forms an unstable compound called oxhemoglobin. So when this oxhemoglobin reaches tissues or cells that are in demand of oxygen, is going to dissociate. It dissociates. When it dissociates, it lets out oxygen. It breaks into oxygen and hemoglobin. And in the process, this oxygen will diffuse into tissues where it will be used for respiration. But why is it that it is very easy for hemoglobin to combine with oxygen? Because it has a high affinity. Hemoglobin has a very high affinity for oxygen. Therefore, very small amount of oxygen will combine with the hemoglobin, and then it forms oxhemoglobin, which is unstable compound. And in the process, when it reaches tissues that are in demand of oxygen, oxhemoglobin dissociates, and in the process releases oxygen for use in the tissues. Role number 2, transportation of carbon dioxide. Another name for carbon dioxide is carbon dioxide. Transportation of carbon dioxide. So how do red blood cells accomplish this? It will do it in the same way. Because of the presence of hemoglobin in the red blood cells, it will combine with carbon dioxide, and in the process it forms a compound called carbaminohemoglobin. Carbon dioxide combines with hemoglobin, and then it forms carbamino hemoglobin. This compound again is unstable. So when we have red blood cells in the blood reaching the lungs with or loaded with carbamino hemoglobin dissociates. When it dissociates, it will dissociate into carbon dioxide. I can use an arrow to show dissociation backwards. Carbon dioxide and hemoglobin in the alveoli of the lungs. Remember, we looked at the respiratory system. We were able to find out that in the alveoli is where gaseous exchange takes place. So when carbamino hemoglobin in blood reaches the lungs or in the alveoli of the lungs, it will dissociate, forming carbon dioxide and hemoglobin. Carbon dioxide will diffuse out of the blood into the alveoli of the lungs. And then it will be let out through exhalation. But that's not the only way in which carbon dioxide is transported by red blood cells. Red blood cells also has plasma. Just like any other cell, all cells have cytoplasm. In the cytoplasm of red blood cells, there is water. In that water, carbon dioxide is going to dissolve, forming weak carbonic acid. So another form in which carbon dioxide will be transported in red blood cells is in form of weak carbonic acid. So we have water in the cytoplasm of red blood cells combining with carbon dioxide, and then it forms a weak compound. That weak compound is called weak carbonic acid. This weak carbonic acid, again, when it reaches the lungs or the blood capillaries in the lungs, it again dissociates, letting out carbon dioxide that will diffuse from the alveoli from the blood capillaries into the alveoli and taken out through exhalation. But this process of water combining with carbon dioxide to form weak carbonic acid requires a catalyst. Catalyst that is biological in nature is one that accomplishes this process is carbonic anhydrase. This carbonic anhydrase is an enzyme. Remember, all biological catalysts are called enzymes. So it requires an enzyme to convert or to form weak carbonic acid in the red blood cells. So that enzyme is called carbonic anhydrase. Now, carbon dioxide and oxygen are not the only gases that human beings or organisms are going to come across. You also have another gas. For example, carbon monoxide. So again, red blood cells are involved in transport of carbon monoxide, also called carbon 2 oxide. When carbon 2 oxide or carbon monoxide comes in contact with the hemoglobin, it forms a very stable. Remember, carbamino is unstable, carbox hemoglobin is oxyhemoglobin that is unstable, but here it's going to form another compound called carboxyhemoglobin. Carboxyhemoglobin. It will be transported, yes, to the lungs. But the problem with carboxyhemoglobin is stable. I emphasize this. We have come across oxyhemoglobin, which is unstable, carb-aminohemoglobin, which is unstable, but this one now is different. It is stable. Because carboxyhemoglobin is stable, it does not dissociate easily when it reaches the lungs. Therefore, it is going to hold on to hemoglobin, denying it a chance to combine with more oxygen for transport into the body. So because of this formation of a stable compound, carboxyhemoglobin, carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide usually is described as a poison. Why is it a poisonous gas? Because it forms a stable compound, carboxyhemoglobin, that does not let out carb-aminohemoglobin to enable it to carry more oxygen to cells and tissues. This one will cause suffocation, and in the process, it may lead to death. Now, we have to find out what situations produces, or under what condition do we have carbon monoxide being produced. Carbon monoxide is produced when we burn, for example, charcoal in limited supply, in less oxygen, or in poorly ventilated rooms. That is why when you are in a room and you have a stove, maybe that is using charcoal as fuel, it's supposed to be well ventilated so that production of carbon dioxide is reduced. Otherwise, it will produce carbon dioxide, and in the process, there will be this reaction forming carboxyhemoglobin, which is stable. And being stable, it may cause suffocation, hence leading to death. Other cells, white blood cells. White blood cells. White blood cells are produced by lymph nodes in adults. Where do we find lymph nodes? Lymph nodes are found in various parts of our bodies. Under the neck, we call them cervical lymph nodes. Armpits, we have axillary lymph nodes. We can just mention them. We have cervical lymph nodes. This one are found in the neck region. We also have axillary lymph nodes. Axillary lymph nodes are found under the armpits. And then we have pelvic lymph nodes. Pelvic lymph nodes in the pelvic region. So that is the major region that produces white blood cells, but in young children or the fetus is usually produced in the spleen. White blood cells are produced in the spleen. White blood cells are different from red blood cells in that one thing about they are slightly larger than red blood cell. And a very striking feature of white blood cells vis-a-vis red blood cells is that they lack hemoglobin. So because they lack hemoglobin, they are not red in color like the red blood cells. types. We have two types of white blood cells. One of them are called granulocytes. Granulocytes include lympho. They are also called lymphocytes. The reason why they are called granulocytes is that they usually kill pathogens or defend the body against microorganisms by a process called by producing antibodies, that is, by producing antibodies. And then we have others called phagocytes. Phagocytes. We have lymphocytes and phagocytes. Phagocytes are also called granulocytes. We just add an A there. Granulocytes. Phagocytes, they defend the body against diseases or pathogens by engulfing the pathogens. Engulfing the pathogens. Engulfing means, for example, if this is the pathogen and we have, this is the white blood cells, it will perform a movement called a amoeboid movement. So that amoeboid movement usually involves extending the cell membrane. When the cell membrane are extended, they'll extend until they enclose this pathogen. When the pathogen is enclosed, we say it has been engulfed. And after being engulfed, it will release some enzymes. It will release some enzymes that will destroy the pathogen. So that process is called phagocytosis. Phagocytosis. So the major role of white blood cells, as we have mentioned the types, is defending the body against invasion by pathogen or foreign microorganisms. So role is simply defense. Defends the body against invasion by pathogens. How is it going to do that? Through production of antibodies. Those are the lymphocytes that will produce the antibodies through a process called phagocytosis. For white blood cells called the phagocytes. So production of antibodies and phagocytosis. So these are the two major processes through which white blood cells defend the body against invasion by pathogens. Another cell is platelets. Platelets are produced in the bone marrows. Bone marrows of all the bones, both long and short. They are usually star-shaped. But their major role, that's the most important thing, the role of platelets, they're involved in blood clotting. In blood clotting. You have noticed that when you get an injury, for example, you cut yourself, blood will ooze out a little bit for maybe some 1 minute, and then after some time, it will stop by itself. Why? Because of formation of a blood clot. Formation of blood clot usually emanates from the platelets. So what does platelets have that enable it be involved in blood clotting? Platelets have an enzyme called thrombokinase. So this thrombokinase is the one that initiates the process of blood clotting. You will learn more about blood clotting in your next stage. But remember that it has an enzyme called thrombokinase that initiates the clotting process. So that's about, we have looked at plasma, blood plasma, then B cells. Remember the cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, and then now platelets. Another component of circulatory system is the heart. The heart. That's the major part of the circulatory system because it is the one that drives the fluid or the blood into the circulatory system. We know that where the heart is situated. The heart is found in the chest cavity. It's located in the chest cavity. But the nature of the heart itself is different from other organs. The heart is mainly made up of muscles called cardiac muscles or tissues. Cardiac tissues are very specialized in that they are highly interconnected. It's made up of interconnected fibers and has many mitochondria. Has many mitochondria. The role of mitochondria here is to provide enough energy for contraction and relaxation of the heart muscle. So the major role of the heart is to contract and relax, and in the process push the blood through the blood vessels for every complete circuit. Contracts and relaxes to push blood through the tubes or the vessels, blood vessels. We are going to look at the circulatory system. But remember, when the heart contracts, usually the arteries are going to relax. When the heart contracts, the arteries are going to relax. When it relaxes, it allows blood from the heart to enter the arteries. When the heart relaxes, the arteries are going to contract. Arteries are going to contract. The heart has relaxed, arteries are going to contract. When they contract, they'll push blood back into the heart for every complete circuit. So this contraction and relaxation, remember we can see there's a relationship. Contraction of the heart, arteries are relaxing. Relaxation of the heart, arteries are contracting. These two, relaxation and contraction, forms what we call a pulse. That's why when you hold to a large vein or a large artery, you will be able to feel that it is pumping up and down. So that up down, we call it one pulse or one beat. That's why we have what you call the heartbeat. One contraction and one relaxation forms one beat or one pulse. So you can, even at your own time, try to measure the pulse rate of your heart or the heartbeat rate. You can maybe time yourself in 1 minute and then you hold at the wrist. One up, one down, one beat, and then you count the number of times you are going to have pulses in 1 minute. The other part is the blood vessels. We have three types of blood vessels in the circulatory system. One, arteries or arteries. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. From the heart. We are going to see this on our chart. Most of this blood that are carried in the arteries are usually oxygenated. It is usually oxygenated. Blood is oxygenated, with the exception of an artery called pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery does not. Pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated. When you say oxygenated blood, it means it has high concentration of oxygen. Deoxygenated blood has low concentration of oxygen. So we are saying arteries carry blood away from the heart. Most of this blood is oxygenated blood, or the blood that is being carried is oxygenated. But we have an exception. Pulmonary artery is the only artery that carries deoxygenated blood. We are going to find it in our chart. We have the veins. Veins carry blood to the heart. To the heart. Most of the blood or blood that's carried in the veins are deoxygenated. Is deoxygenated. Blood is deoxygenated. But we have an exception. Pulmonary vein. Pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood. You're going to find out why. Why is it that pulmonary artery is carrying deoxygenated, pulmonary vein is carrying oxygenated blood? There's a slight difference between arteries and veins. Arteries are usually thick. They have a thicker wall. Have a thick wall. But veins have a thin wall. And then a very important characteristic of veins is that they have valves. These are some of the things you looked at in your previous year. We also have another blood vessel called capillary. Capillaries are usually smaller than arteries and veins and are highly branched. So the reason why they are highly branched is to increase surface area. Increases surface area. Now, why should it have a large surface area? It should have large surface area because that is the site where exchange of materials takes place. So the role of capillaries, site for exchange of materials. What do I mean? For instance, if that's the capillary, this capillary maybe has high concentration of oxygen. Blood in the capillary has high concentration of oxygen. And here in the tissues or cells around here, there is high concentration of carbon 4 oxide. Oxygen will diffuse into the cells through the walls of the capillaries. And then carbon 4 oxide will diffuse into the blood in the capillaries through the walls of the capillaries. So in the process, it's providing a site for exchange of materials. We can also have other materials like nutrients. Let us use glucose. Glucose will diffuse from the blood in the blood capillaries across its thin walls into the cells or tissues. And if we have waste metabolic products from metabolism of cells. Waste metabolic products will diffuse from the cells into the blood in the blood capillaries, which will be carried to the veins and then to the site of excretion. So emphasis, site for exchange of materials. We have seen materials like waste metabolic products, glucose, gases, carbon dioxide from cells into the blood, oxygen from the blood into the cells. So I want us to look at this question before we look at the main circulatory system. This question. Compare blood arteries, compare arteries, veins, and capillaries. And the capillaries by filling the table below. By filling the table below. So one of the structure you will examine among these three is the diameter. Diameter. Another one is thickness of the wall. And then another one, you look at valves, if they are present or not. So we can go together. Structure, diameter of artery, vein, and capillary. Diameter of the artery is usually small. Vein has a large diameter, and capillaries has the smallest. So we use the comparative word smaller. And there's a reason why we have all this. Artery has small diameter so as to create a high pressure that can increase the pushing of the blood. Veins usually have a large diameter or lumen. It's also called lumen. So that it can allow blood to flow freely back to the heart, since the blood has lost pressure along the way. And then capillary, being the smallest, and for it to act as a site for gaseous exchange, will have the smallest lumen. So again, to increase pressure for filtration of materials out of the capillaries. Thickness of the wall. This one has thicker walls. Artery. Vein has thin walls. But for capillary, it is more thinner. In fact, one cell thick. One cell thick. Capillary has one cell thick wall so that it can reduce distance for materials to diffuse across the walls. Then valves. If you examine the artery, has no valves. Vein has valves. The reason why veins have valves is to prevent backflow of blood, since the blood in veins are flowing at a low pressure. So it is very easy for blood to flow back. But because we have valves, it is going to prevent the backflow of blood. And then capillary have no valves. Have no valves. So I want us to go to the main circulatory system and find out how blood flows through the system. We have a chart that's going to help us. The circulatory system has three components. The heart, this place or that region is the heart. We have the blood that is flowing through these vessels, and then these are the blood vessels. So we shall go through them as we name some of the parts. So this is the heart, but this heart has some parts. This part, how do we call it? I wanted to use it to show the flow of blood, but let me just use it. Ready now, Nagan? So that part of the heart, if you did your hand, if you do labeling from this position, this part is the left, this is right. So this is left. So this is left ventricle. This side of the heart, right ventricle. So the two lower chambers of the heart are called ventricles. But we have the right and left ventricle. And then the upper chambers are called auricles. So if it's on this side, it will be called right auricle. On this side, shall be called left ventricle. Still, in the heart we have other structures. That part is a valve. That's also another valve. But because it's on the left side, it's called bicuspid valve. Bicuspid valve. This one is on the right. There's some rhyming there. We call it tricuspid valve. Tricuspid valve. We are going to look at the functions of each. We have another valve there. This valve here and here, they are the same. We call them semilunar valve. Semilunar valves. There are two. We have a blood vessel that carries blood away from the right ventricle. That one is called pulmonary artery. Remember, we have said arteries carry blood away from the heart. It will carry blood to the lungs. That part is the lung. And then blood will flow back into the heart or the left auricle, not ventricle. This is auricle. Through a blood vessel called pulmonary vein. Again, remember, all blood vessels that carry blood back to the heart are called veins. Are the veins. Veins carry blood back to the heart. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, but sometimes composition may vary. And then we have a blood vessel that is carrying blood away from, I'll label it from that point, away from the left ventricle, aorta. Is called aorta. Blood carrying A blood vessel carrying blood back to the heart is called Vena Cava. Vena Cava. Now we can go down. When blood is carried into the aorta, it has a lot of oxygen. It can go to any parts of the body. We have the upper part of the body. We have the liver. We have stomach and intestines. Stomach and intestines. Then kidneys. And the lower part, limbs. Lower part of the body. So this artery carrying blood to the heart, to the liver, that is, to the liver, is called hepatic. Hepatic artery. And there's a blood vessel leaving the liver, carrying blood from the liver. We call it hepatic again. Spelling varus. Hepatic vein. It's not an R. And then to the stomach, we have an artery carrying blood to the stomach. We call it mesenteric artery. Mesenteric artery. We have blood vessel from the stomach to the liver, hepatic. It's called hepatic portal vein. Hepatic portal vein. To the liver is called renal artery. And then from the liver, from the kidneys, is called renal vein. Renal vein. So let us go through the circulatory system. We have known the parts. So this left ventricle is the thickest of the two ventricles. In fact, if you compare the upper chambers and the lower chambers, the lower one are usually large in size. The upper one are smaller in volume. Volume, that is. Volume small, volume is large. But this left ventricle has thick muscles than right ventricles. We want to find out why. When left ventricles contract, blood will get out of the left ventricle, this chamber, left ventricle, and it flows through this vein, through this vessel, that is. You can remember the name of this vessel. That vessel is called aorta. It will supply the upper part to the lower part. Remember that blood has come from the lungs. So it has a lot of oxygen. So aorta carries blood away from the left ventricles. But that blood is having high concentration of oxygen. Then to the liver through hepatic artery, to the stomach through mesenteric artery, to kidneys through renal artery, and to the lower part of the body. This blood, as it is flowing, it is being used. Oxygen that is found in it is being consumed. So in the process, as it leaves these parts, it will have less oxygen. Blood will be having less oxygen. So because it is having less oxygen, then we call that blood as deoxygenated blood. But there is something here that we should note. From stomach to the liver, from stomach we do not have a direct blood vessel to the veins. That blood from the stomach must go into the liver. There is a reason. One of the reasons why blood from the stomach to the liver, from the stomach should flow to the liver is that one role of liver is that it's used in regulation. Role of the liver is to regulate the level of glucose. Remember, in the stomach or in the intestines, we have digestion. Digestion of, for example, carbohydrates. Carbohydrates have been broken down to release a lot of sugar. Sugar must be regulated. How will it be regulated? Through the liver, or in the liver before it flows to the rest of the circulatory system. So because of that, it has to flow to the liver for sugar regulation. Also, amino acids have to be regulated before they flow to the rest of the body system. Even lipids and several other components that comes from the stomach. So we are calling that as a hepatic portal vein. So you realize that a hepatic portal vein will have high concentration of digested food. For example, glucose high. Amino acids will be very high. Lipids will also be very high. And then this blood, after being used by tissues, will flow back to the heart through the vena cava. In the vena cava, that blood will flow into the right auricle. In the right auricle, when the blood is full, this valve opens, tricuspid valve. Tricuspid valve opens, and it lets the blood to flow into the right ventricle. When this ventricle is full and it contracts, it will push the blood through this blood vessel, pulmonary artery, into the lungs. Remember, we said pulmonary artery is the only artery that carries the oxygenated blood, because this blood is coming from the rest of the body to the heart and then out of the heart through pulmonary artery, and then it will flow to the lungs. Why should blood flow to the lungs? For oxygenation. So blood that will come from the lungs back to the heart will have highest concentration of oxygen. So blood will flow back to the heart through pulmonary vein into left auricle. This left auricle, the volume will increase, and then bicuspid valve opens. When it opens, it lets blood into the left ventricle. So we have two types of circulation here. Blood flowing through the pulmonary arteries. Pulmonary artery, lungs, vein, back to the heart. From the heart, pulmonary artery, lungs, pulmonary vein, back to the heart. We call that one as pulmonary circulation. Pulmonary circulation is called pulmonary circulation. We can see the reason. Why? Because blood is flowing through pulmonary vessels, blood vessels, pulmonary artery, lungs, pulmonary vein from the lungs to the heart. So that's one. Then two, to the rest of the body system. To the rest of the body system. We are emphasizing the word body system. So because of that, we call it systemic circulation. Systemic circulation. Why systemic circulation? From the heart through the aorta to the rest of the body system, then back to the heart through the vena cava. So this is the circulatory system, and I think we have understood every role, part of each, the role of each of these parts. So I think if there's a question, you'll channel to us through the email that we usually provide. I hope you have enjoyed the lesson. Thank you.